This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Oil prices jump to a 4-year high on fears of renewed military escalation, with Iran threatening to further squeeze regional supply and dent global growth. Well, Australia's foreign minister is in Seoul on the final stop of a regional tour, with both nations deepening energy ties, bolstering supply chains and locking in a diesel and LNG flows amid the Middle East turmoil. Taiwan activating backup communications for the strategic island of Dongyin after bad weather apparently shifted a ship wreckage onto an undersea cable, severing the link. And China names a veteran regional official as its new agriculture minister in what is the second top-level shakeup for the ministry in 2 years. North Korea, facing a severe drought, is stepping up efforts to protect its crops ahead of the rice planting season, with officials repairing waterways and deploying pumps to limit the damage. Also tonight, May Day holidays are almost upon us. Chinese travelers expected to head out in record numbers across the 5-day break. We'll find out where they're going. And Hong Kong's ban on the sale and possession of e-cigarettes begins. Residents and visitors caught with vapes in public could face fines and up to 6 months in jail. Iran's president has criticized the U.S. naval blockade of Iranian ports, describing it as doomed to fail. Now, Masoud Pezeshkian adding that such measures will deepen disruptions in the Gulf and fail to achieve his objectives. His remarks come after President Donald Trump warned the blockade against Iran could last for months. Reports say the U.S. could be eyeing a new international coalition to get ships moving through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the strait has become a key sticking point in stalled peace talks between Washington and Tehran as the war on Iran enters its 3rd month amid an ongoing ceasefire. And let's check in now with Roland Lim on where oil prices are headed. Roland?
Thanks, Ateli. Yes, so oil prices surging to the highest level since 2022 as fears grow over prolonged blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. As you can see, both indices are benchmarks pairing off their earlier highs. Brent crude is currently down 1.39%. Now, it briefly topped $126 a barrel earlier. That's a 7% jump. Meantime, the West Texas Intermediate also climbing 3.4% to $110 a barrel. It is also close to that mark. It's currently $108.80. Analysts say the traders are beginning to shift to the view that the crisis will not be as short-lived as initially hoped for. President Trump has signaled the blockade will continue until Iran agrees to a nuclear deal. Now, with reports that U.S. military commanders are briefing the president on potential strike options against Iran, markets are pricing in disruptions through to the end of June.
Well, thanks, Roland, for the update on oil prices. We'll check in again for more on business a little later in the program. Now, in other news, South Korea and Australia are stepping up cooperation to secure energy supplies as global disruptions linked to the Middle East crisis tighten markets. Now, the move comes as Australia's Foreign Minister Penny Wong is in Seoul on the final leg of her East Asia trip after stops in China and Japan. Both sides have agreed to strengthen supply chain resilience and ensure steady flows of key resources like diesel and liquefied natural gas. Now, they also reaffirmed plans to work closely to safeguard energy security. Both sides agreeing to keep each other informed of any potential disruptions and consult when needed. The agreement was outlined in a joint statement ahead of talks between South Korean Foreign Minister Cho Hyun and Ms. Wong in Seoul. The two countries flagged concerns over the Middle East situation, warning that it's beginning to affect energy supplies and critical materials across the region.
에너지 공급망 문제는 이번 중동 전쟁 상황으로 인해서 아주 국제사회에 화두가 되고 아주 중요한 문제이고, 그리고 한 호주 간에는 에너지 어떤 공급과 그다음에 이제 수입에 있어서 아주 긴밀하게 연결이 되어 있습니다. 그래서 이제 우리 고위급 뿐만 아니라 그 실무급 레벨에서도 이 문제를 어떻게 이제 효과적으로 다루어 나갈지에 대한 그런 소통을 지속적으로 해왔고, 그래서 이제 양국이 상호 이제 이익이 되고 만족하는 그런 해결책을 모색하는 쪽으로 계속 협의를 해 나갈 것입니다.
Beyond that, Seoul and Canberra pledged deeper regional collaboration. They aim to speed up energy transition efforts, push back against trade restriction, and support open energy markets. The partnership is seen as vital. Australia is South Korea's largest LNG supplier, while Seoul exports significant volumes of diesel and refined fuels to Canberra. Now, energy security has been a central theme throughout Ms. Wong's East Asia trip. In China, she said that Beijing had agreed to work with Australian firms on jet fuel shipments, a possible sign Chinese export curbs could ease amid supply strains caused by the Iran conflict. Now, a similar message in Japan as well. Ms. Wong and her Japanese counterpart agreed to tighten coordination as disruptions continue to hit fuel supply chains. She warned that the conflict in the Middle East is having a disproportionate impact on the Asia-Pacific and said close cooperation will be key to navigating the uncertainty. Taiwan has activated backup communications for Dongyin, a remote and strategically located island that's located in the Chinese coast after an undersea cable broke. Poor weather conditions apparently shifted a ship wreckage onto the cable, cutting the link. Well, I've got CNA senior correspondent Victoria Jen. Well, she joins us live now from Taipei. Vic, first up, how are authorities dealing with this severed undersea cable?
Well, authorities moved very quickly after the cable broke. Zhonghua Telecom reported the damage yesterday, saying the undersea cable near Dongying had completely snapped, cutting the main connection to the island. To avoid a full outage, Taiwan immediately switched to a backup system using microwave signals. So for now, people on Dongying can still make calls, use mobile data, and go online. But it's not perfect. Internet can be slower or less stable, especially with the weather still not great. And cable TV is still down for now because it can't run on the backup system. At the same time, repair work is being arranged. A cable repair ship will be sent out, but this depends on sea conditions. Officials say if the weather allows, repairs could be done by the end of July. So right now, the focus is keeping basic services running while working to fix the cable as soon as possible.
So, Victoria, I mean, this incident, once again highlighting how vulnerable Taiwan's undersea cables can be. So I'm curious to know, how is Taipei trying to reduce the risk?
Yes, this really highlights a key vulnerability for Taiwan, especially when it comes to outlying islands. Places like Dongying rely on just a small number of undersea cables to stay connected. So when one cable breaks, the impact is immediate because there are very limited alternatives. We've seen this before. Now, in 2023, 2 cables serving the Matsu Islands were cut, and that left residents with very limited internet access for weeks. So since then, Taiwan has been trying to strengthen backup systems, including microwave links like the one being used now, and also testing satellite-based internet for remote areas. But what this incident shows is that these backups are still not a full replacement. They can keep basic services running, but they don't offer the same speed or stability as undersea cables. And that matters because these islands are not just remote communities. They are also strategically located along the Taiwan Strait with military importance. So reliable communication is not just about daily life. It's also about coordination, security, and readiness. And this is why incidents like this tend to draw attention, because they expose a weak point that Taiwan is still working to fix. Oteli?
Many thanks for that update. CNA's senior correspondent Victoria Jen reporting to us live from Taipei. Now, China has appointed Zhang Zhu as Agriculture Minister 2 days after naming him the chief of the ministry's Communist Party operations. Now, this marks the department's second top-level shake-up in as many years. Zhang Zhu replaces Han Jun, who had also served as both agriculture minister and party chief since 2024. Now, Now, no details were given on Han Jun's removal. Mr. Zhang previously served as party chief of Urumqi, the capital of Xinjiang, and as deputy party secretary of the province. He also held agriculture-related roles in neighboring Ningxia. Now, Mr. Zhang's predecessor, Han Jun, had replaced Tang Renjian, who was probed by an anti-graft watchdog in May 2024 and later convicted of bribery. North Korea is reportedly stepping up nationwide efforts to protect crops ahead of the rice planting season as it battles an unusually severe drought. The dry spell is adding pressure on a country already struggling with chronic food shortages. The state media KCNA says the drought is widespread. Workers have been mobilized nationwide to shield early season crops, and officials are deploying pumps, securing irrigation, water and repairing reservoirs to limit damage to wheat and barley. North Korea's premier visited farms in 2 provinces and called for the full use of available water sources and stronger irrigation systems. Now, he warned that this year's harvest depends on overcoming the severe drought. The impact of such natural disaster will be amplified by North Korea's weak infrastructure, leaving it highly vulnerable to natural shocks. Food insecurity is already a concern, with shortages reported earlier this year. North Korea has been listed by the Food and Agriculture Organization as a food deficit country for 19 consecutive years. Coming up next on East Asia tonight, China's factory activity tops expectations in April, despite surging energy prices and shipping disruption caused by the war in the Middle East. Plus, Samsung reports a record quarterly profit driven by a 49-fold jump in chip income. Details in a bit. Hello again. Good to have your company on East Asia tonight. Well, we've got Roland Lim. He is standing by with the very latest from the business world. And today we're talking about China's factories apparently reporting positive activity in April.
Yes, but market watchers worry that the solid numbers may be short-lived, squeezed by rising energy as well as raw material prices headed higher. China's growth remains resilient despite external shocks from the Middle East conflict. Now, factory activity expanded for a second straight month in April as manufacturers ramped out output to ship goods early. That's amid fears that the Iran conflict could raise costs. New export orders hit their strongest levels in 2 years. The official manufacturing PMI eased slightly to 50.3 in April from 50.4 in March, but still stayed above the 50 mark, separating growth from contraction and beating forecasts of 50.1. The private sector gauge, that's the rating dog PMI, reflected a more upbeat picture. Now, it rose to 52.2 in April from 50.8 the month before. But analysts warn the rebound may be short-lived. They say the escalating Middle East conflict is exposing risks in China's production-led growth model, with higher energy costs likely to curb new orders once stockpiling fades. Input prices have remained elevated as well. A prolonged conflict could weigh on the global economy and weaken external demand. That's a key driver of China's growth as domestic consumption stays subdued. Let's take a look at the Greater China markets. It's looking mixed. Shanghai Composite closing out the day slightly high, 4,112 points. Shenzhen, the second bourse, ending flat at 15,107. In Hong Kong, tech stocks leading the losers. It's down 1.3%. Meantime, Japan's factory output unexpectedly fell last month as production of chemical and petroleum-based goods dropped, suggesting the Middle East conflict is starting to hit its fragile economy. Industrial production shrank 0.5% in March from the previous month against expectations of a 1.1% rise. Now, that marks a second straight monthly decline after a 2% drop back in February. The data highlights the Bank of Japan's dilemma as it weighs raising still low interest rates. Now, rising oil prices and supply constraints are fueling inflation while weighing on the import-reliant economy. Manufacturers expect output to fall again this month, forecasting a 0.7% decline. A separate government survey shows consumer confidence fell in April, signaling households are feeling the squeeze from higher living costs. Now, Taiwan's economy grew at its fastest pace in almost 4 decades as the island rides the AI and tech boom. The GDP for the quarter ending March grew by more than 13% on year. That's its fastest since 1987. Now, the island's exports last month, also reached an all-time high at $80.2 billion, while shipments rising 62% on year, nearly doubling estimates. Taiwan's boom can be largely attributed to TSMC, which also recorded a 35% jump in quarterly revenue on year. Now, TSMC's success has also helped to propel the island's stock market up the leaderboard to 6th place globally, overtaking the UK and Canada in just the last 3 weeks. Shenzhen's metro operator reported its worst loss in 2 decades, dragged down by its holdings in embattled property developer China Wong. Now, Shenzhen Metro Group said it lost $5.5 billion in 2025, which was 12% deeper than the year before. Now, this comes as Wong reported almost $13 billion in losses as China's property market remains in a years-long slump. Shenzhen Metro is one of Wong's biggest shareholder with a 27% stake. The metro operator provided Wong with more than $4 billion in loans last year, but the company says the losses have not substantially impacted its operations or its fiscal health. Samsung Electronics hitting record profits for the January to March period, driven by an almost 50-fold jump in chip income. It's warning of a severe supply shortage next year, with clients spending on AI driving up prices. A net adjusted profit for the January to March period rose to $32 billion, beating market estimates. That's on the back of revenue, which surged 68% on year. Now, its strong report card was driven by higher chip prices as an artificial intelligence boom has led to an increased demand for semiconductors. The electronics giant said that the conflict in the Middle East has not disrupted chip making, as the firm has secured inventory and diversified sources of gases used in manufacturing. However, it's flagging the risk of higher transportation costs with rising oil prices. Samsung shares giving up earlier gains. It closed the day 222,500 won apiece. A Standard Chartered Bank has posted a better than expected 17% pre-tax profit of $2.45 billion. That's above the bank's own forecast of $2.14 billion. The latest quarterly revenue surged 9% on year to nearly $6 billion. The upbeat results highlighting how European banks have so far been able to shrug off the direct impact of the war on their businesses. Now, the lender, which makes most of its money in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, was lifted by stronger activity in capital markets and wealth management. Income from its wealth business jumped 32%, driven by demand for investment products. Global banking income also rose 19%, helped by stronger bond issuance from corporate clients. But Standard Chartered also booked a $190 million charge for expected losses linked to the Iran conflict. The bank said this reflected cautious scenario planning rather than any major deterioration in credit quality. Its Hong Kong-listed shares rising 4% after results before paring off some of those gains, ending the day up nearly 2%. Now, China's top 3 state-owned airlines are back in the black. Air China, China Eastern, and China Southern all swung to first quarter profits, helped by strong Chinese New Year travel, as well as recovering international demand. Flagship carrier Air China swung from a nearly $281 million loss to a $248 million profit. That's a turnaround of about 188% on year. China Eastern improved by about 272% on year, while China Southern saw a roughly 308% swing. First quarter revenues for Air China and China Eastern were both up 17% on year, while China Southern was up 16% on year. But investors remain cautious. Their Hong Kong shares slipped as higher jet fuel prices from the Iran war threaten to squeeze margins. From in-car assistance to driver support systems and automated parking, smart AI-powered features are setting a new baseline for China's highly competitive EV market. And for many Chinese buyers, the ideal car is no longer just an affordable one. CNA's Rebecca Mateo with more from the world's largest auto show in Beijing.
车展，那借着这个北京国际车展的大舞台呢，我也想跟一些
For 3 straight days, 32-year-old automotive influencer Huang Yichao has been moving through Beijing's auto show. He's produced nearly a dozen videos introducing the latest car models on display, drawing tens of thousands of views on social media.
趁着车展的这个期间，经销商就是车企这边也会有一些车展的优惠。
This year, Mr. Huang says brands want him to spotlight one thing in particular: their smart driving technology.
很多中国的消费者他比较关注的是自己的车子，跟朋友的车子相比起来，在智能化方面有没有更加的好，而不是说我车子开起来怎么样。
There's also been more interest in models jointly developed by Chinese and foreign automakers.
国内有一个slogan 叫做合资2.0时代嘛，合资品牌2.0时代，就意思就是说，用他们的一些标准，用他们的一些工艺，然后再结合我们中国品牌或者中国供应商这一边的智能化座舱的这个研发，从而去造出一些更加适合我们中国国情的合资品牌的车。
With more than 890,000 visitors expected at this year's auto show, manufacturers are looking to cash in on the buzz. Walking around the different automakers' booths, it's clear that many of the brands are keen to promote the latest AI offerings to those who come by. At some booths, visitors are also able to get into the driver's seat and try out some of the features for themselves, like an AI assistant. I can command it, for example, to open the window. Hi Nomi, 打开车窗。好的。 Navigate the roads. Hi Nomi, 打开地图。你打开地图。And increasingly understand a user's preferences. Hi Nomi, 讲我想听的故事。我是你们的好朋友菲菲姐姐哦，又到了听故事的时间了。Other brands are showcasing driver assistance systems for parking and highway navigation, while some also highlight how cameras and sensors can help spot road hazards earlier, but are bias sold.
然后像现在很普遍流行的那种语音交互，还有像支架之类的呀，都是比较可以说是比较基础的一些智能了。
价位不太考虑，因为我车比较多，然后主要就是功能、空间上面。
The push from automakers comes as Chinese passenger vehicle sales fell by 17.4% year-on-year in the first quarter of 2026. Analysts say the EV industry has entered a new phase after the government cut back on subsidies and as industry profits have been squeezed amid a brutal price war.
In China, the average consumer's age actually is very young. If they can actually offer this kind of new technology, they would love to pay the premium. This is actually pretty different from Western mature markets. So they actually are very loyal to certain brand.
Mr. Zhang adds that while EV adoption is strong in China's Tier 1 cities, rural areas still have potential for growth.
I think the basic thing government can do, try to encourage more charging infrastructure construction in this rural area. So these small villages can generate this electricity power by themselves and then can charge a small EV at a very low cost.
Analysts expect the battle for Chinese consumers to remain fierce, even as exports become a bigger focus for Chinese automakers. Rebecca Mateo, CNA, Beijing.
And that'll do it for business on this Thursday evening.
Thanks very much for that, Roland. Right, time now for another break, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, a Hong Kong ban on vapes and e-cigarettes in public spaces takes effect today as the city takes its crackdown on tobacco one step further. And U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth testifies before the Congress over the war on Iran as he seeks more than $1 trillion in funding toward the department's budget. This is East Asia tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Oil prices easing after jumping to a 4-year high on fears of renewed military escalation with Iran. U.S. President Donald Trump warns that the blockade on Iranian ports could last for months. Iran's president criticized his remarks, describing it as doomed to fail. South Korea and Australia agree to step up cooperation as both countries look to secure energy supply chain resilience amid uncertainty due to the Middle East conflict. Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong is in Seoul on the final leg of her regional trip. And Taiwan activating backup communications for the strategic island of Dongyin after bad weather apparently shifted a ship wreckage onto an undersea cable, severing the link. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has made his first public appearance before Congress since the war on Iran started. Testifying before the House Armed Services Committee, he sparred with the lawmakers during a nearly 6-hour-long hearing. Democrats slammed the Trump administration for getting America into, quote, a quagmire.
This war of choice is a political and economic disaster at every level. Despite the president's promise to lower the cost of living, gas prices are up 40% and inflation is soaring, so much for lowering the cost of living. The president has got himself and America stuck in the quagmire of another war in the Middle East. He's desperately trying to extricate himself from his own mistakes.
Who are you cheering for here? Who are you pulling for? Our troops are doing incredible work. They've done incredible things for the entirety of this mission and achieved incredible battlefield success. Your hatred for President Trump blinds you to the truth of the success of this mission and the historic stakes that the president is addressing, which the American people support.
The Secretary Hegseth asked for a whopping $1.5 trillion in funding, calling it a historic warfighting budget. Already, the department's financial chief revealed that $25 billion has been spent on the war effort, mostly on munitions. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who also attended the hearing, defended the need for the extra funding, calling it a down payment for future security.
The character of warfighting is changing pretty quickly. Mass, simultaneity, autonomy, undersea, space, cyber, information, all of those ways that are now manifesting themselves on the battlefields around the world require a higher end of capital investment.
Well, the Iran war has been largely defined by airstrikes and military escalation, but it's also exposing a less visible danger, a growing wave of GPS disruption that's distorting how ships navigate at sea, the resulting turmoil among the talking points at a major shipping conference in Singapore.
A weapon of modern war, yet not a single bullet fired in anger. GNSS spoofing. Deployed, it's believed, by both sides, throwing navigation systems in the Strait of Hormuz into chaos. It works by imitating legitimate GPS signals, overpowering real satellite transmissions with stronger counterfeit ones that cause ships nearby to miscalculate their location, even if they are not the intended target. Trackers see vessels appearing on land or going in near-perfect circles or exhibiting other implausible behavior. Anomalies that, when multiplied in one of the world's busiest shipping lanes, increase vulnerability in times of conflict.
We are having from the very first day a huge escalation with 100 and more instances and more than 800 vessels that have been affected.
Shipping industry executives at the recent Singapore Maritime Week, highlighting the extent of the problem since the beginning of the war in Iran. Disruptions surged in the immediate aftermath. Within 24 hours of the first strikes, nearly 700 ships were affected. That figure climbed in days that followed, peaking at more than 2,200 in a single day on the 8th of March. Activity has since eased, though hundreds of ships are still being disrupted every day. GNSS spoofing by an external force is a significant problem, but so too are ships going dark by choice in a hope of avoiding conflict.
The tricky part right now with the Strait of Hormuz is that the vast majority of the vessels over there, they're passing with their eyes off. They're switching off their systems in order to protect themselves against the Iranian regime. So for all these vessels, you have to cross-check about the amount and specific vessels that they are still exist.
While intentionally going off the GPS radar has its own self-imposed dangers, being affected by spoofing externally is a double threat: weapons above water and dangerously inaccurate navigational instruments.
You cannot trust what your system says about you. You cannot trust the depth that you are having in beneath. You cannot be sure about the speed that you are having. So instantly, you have to slower your pace. It means that we do have an increased risk of having a collision, of having an oil spill, or to have a grounding as well.
Similar activity has been reported near other conflict zones, including the Black Sea, since the war in Ukraine. Collectively, these wars adding to the urgency and to the challenge faced by commercial shipping.
One of the challenges that we're experiencing right now is the different geopolitical conflicts. And for those, it's difficult for shipping then to turn into more than just a merchant vessel. We're not really a military asset. So it will have to take some time for us to actually verify what is the additional standards we will have to put in place.
As conflicts reshape the risks at sea, the maritime industry is being forced to adapt in real time, because in today's battle space, the next threat may not be visible, only detected.
Hong Kong is taking its crackdown on tobacco one step further. The city is banning vapes and e-cigarettes in public starting today, and there are plans to eventually ban them in private spaces as well. Geraldine Yap with this report.
Officers were out at Hong Kong's business district on Thursday morning, telling people about the new ban on vapes in public and taking action. At least 2 people were caught and fined, including this man in orange who had his vape confiscated. Residents CNA talked to were mostly supportive of the ban.
對大家都好嘛，我唔想吸煙嘅，都唔使嚟影響到我。
就是現在本身中國整個範圍內是在推進一個禁煙的一個過程嘛，我覺得這是一個好的趨勢。
Going out in the street where the smoke itself could evaporate into the air, I don't find that a problem. So I think it's almost against our freedom, to be able to do what we like to do.
From Thursday, anyone found with small quantities of alternative smoking products in public places will be fined 3,000 Hong Kong dollars. That's about $380 US. People with larger amounts could be fined much more and jailed. Hong Kong's smoking rate dropped to a record low of 8.5% last year, and less than 1% of people above 15 vape. But officials say the goal is a completely smoke-free Hong Kong.
The new products, say the electronic cigarettes, heated tobacco products, pose a significant risk to the health and also to the tobacco control and public health, because these products are intended to attract the youth usage, and it will cause nicotine dependence and causing them to become a next generation of smokers.
The vape ban applies to everyone, tourists included. Posters are up around the city and announcements are made on incoming flights. The new rules set the stage for an eventual ban on vaping in private spaces as well, although no timeline has been announced. This comes 4 years after selling and importing of vapes was first banned in Hong Kong in 2022. Still, people have been able to buy their vapes on the internet.
Before the implementation of the complete ban, if someone vapes on the street, it's not against the law. The only thing you can ask is, where did that vaporizer comes by, someone can just say, oh, it's my stock 5 years ago. But now if I see someone vaping, then it is already against the law. It doesn't matter whether it's bought 4 years ago or yesterday. So it helps in curbing kind of a black market, because even if you buy it, you cannot use it publicly.
There are critics. Some say the vape ban could force users back to cigarettes.
A couple of my friends and I have said that we'll just try and give up vaping and smoking, but I imagine I'll probably go back to smoking in some form.
The Hong Kong Council on Smoking and Health does not agree. Data shows traditional cigarette use is on a downtrend, and the city is also moving on other fronts, banning flavoured cigarettes and making tobacco packaging plain across the board.
With all these multi-pronged strategy carried out together, and with public education, we believe that more and more smokers, either they are smokers for e-cigarettes or if they are traditional cigarette smokers, they will turn to quit smoking for the health of themselves and for their family members.
A survey this month showed that just over half of alternative tobacco users said they will continue vaping in private. 35% plan to go back to smoking cigarettes, and 10% said they'll consider quitting altogether. Geraldine Yap, CNA, Hong Kong.
Coming up on East Asia tonight, the May Day holiday is just around the corner. We'll get the latest from our correspondent live from one of Shanghai's main railway stations to see where Chinese travelers are headed. China is expected to see record travel during the upcoming May Day holiday, with more than 1.5 billion trips forecast over the 5-day break. And much of that demand is being driven domestically, with higher fuel costs making overseas trips more expensive and prompting travelers to stay closer to home. Well, that shift is supporting Beijing's push to boost consumption amid an economic slowdown and stagnant wage growth. Local governments have been rolling out vouchers and tourism campaigns to encourage travelers to spend. And for more, let's go to CNA's senior correspondent Han Yuguan, and he joins us live from the Shanghai railway station. So, Yuguan, tell us what's happening at your end.
Well, Tally, it really does feel like a holiday rush is underway. I'm outside one of Shanghai's main railway station, one of 4, and you can see it right away. Lots of family, lots of luggage, people moving through in steady ways. So even before we dig into the numbers, you can tell from the atmosphere that this is a major travel moment.
Right, Hugo, let's dig into those numbers then. How big are we talking?
Well, it is absolutely massive. The Transport Ministry says China is expecting around 1.5 billion cross-regional trips over the May Day break. That said, the number double counts round trips, and it's still about 6 times lower than the total for the Spring Festival holidays. But because this holiday is shorter, the daily average is about the same. On a daily basis, we are looking at a peak of over 340 million trips nationwide tomorrow, while all of Shanghai's railway stations are expected to see a peak of 800,000 departures tomorrow. In fact, just for this station behind me, even as we speak, we can expect about 1,000 passengers would have boarded the trains by the time we are done talking, Otelli.
Right. And we've been seeing reports about concerns regarding flight cancellations. Yuguan, how serious is that problem?
Yes, globally, there's been flight cancellations. The most striking number is on international flights. The cancellation rate has risen to 7.4% for the May Day period. That's from 3.6% a year ago. My crew actually caught up with a Malaysian couple who actually had their flight cancelled prior to coming to Shanghai. Let's take a listen.
生气是肯定生气啊，因为航班无缘无故被取消，而且还要是很临时的那一种。那既然我们都选择来了，酒店也订了，那我们就硬着头皮换其他的时间再来吧。
反正都想要来旅游这样子。
So you heard there, the cancellations are definitely affecting people. But I think the important thing is not to overstate the increase in cancellations. This is not a broad shutdown of air travel. What we are seeing is a more selective than that. Some international routes, especially the thinner leisure routes, are under pressure, but the main trunk routes are still operating. So it's better to see this as a strain in part because of the market rather than a collapse across the board.
So Yuguan, tell us a bit more about exactly what's driving that strain, that increase in cancellations for international flights.
The main reason is, of course, triggered by the energy crisis sparked by the US-Iran war. The massive hike in oil prices has made it unprofitable for some airlines, especially low-cost budget airlines, to continue running some flights that are either not fully booked or booked by passengers at a really low price. We understand that quite a few headed to Southeast Asia has been cancelled. An interesting statistic that has emerged is that the plane utilization rate has dropped, showing that airlines would rather ground some of their planes than fly at a loss for some routes.
Yuguan, just want to go back to talking a bit more about China, because you spoke earlier about these massive numbers on the move. Do we know how are most people traveling for this upcoming 5-day-long weekend?
Well, mainly on the ground. Roads still carry the biggest share of holiday travel in China. We're expecting massive jams on the highway. Rail is second in the pecking order. So while the airports are busy too, this is really a road and rail story first. Road trips are expected to make up nearly 92% of all trips. Rail, about 8%, and by air, only under 1%. So you can see those road trip numbers you see really show you that domestic travel dominates. Since China is a big country, few of those road trips will cross borders. And what's more, Shanghai is gaining a bit of a windfall from domestic travelers ahead of the holidays this year. That's because neighboring Zhejiang, where tech hub Hangzhou is, has just kicked off spring break school holidays. According to Ctrip, Shanghai is the #2 urban destination after Beijing. Now, meanwhile, the May Day long weekend also applies to other countries. So China is also seeing an influx of travelers. Traffic is expected to peak 2.4 million in a single day. According to the same Ctrip report, Shanghai is the top inbound destination for China. We are talking about folks traveling from outside of mainland China, so that will include Chinese nationals from Hong Kong, Macau, as well as foreigners from everywhere else. Ctrip has a leaderboard on the sources of countries for those inbound tourists. So drum rolls, #1, Russia, #2, Japan, #3, South Korea. Russia is, of course, no surprise. It is a neighbor and one with increasing close ties with China. But Japan's #2 position is interesting, as we know the government-to-government relationship between Japan and China isn't all that good. But from the numbers, it is clear that the people are still traveling. Another interesting number is Singapore. Despite its tiny population, Singapore, incidentally, is #7 in the Ctrip leaderboard. It does show that these two countries have close ties, and the people in Singapore have keen interest in China. Oteli?
All right, overall, sounds like it's got a huge holiday movement this May Day holiday. Thanks so very much for your report, CNA senior correspondent Tan Yuguan, live from the Shanghai railway station. Now, electric vehicles are often seen as cheaper and cleaner to run, but as more EVs hit the road, a more complicated picture is emerging. In China, where adoption is among the highest in the world, some owners are beginning to feel the downsides as their cars age. Now, CNA's digital correspondent Li Kim-seong shares his findings with us.
What we are seeing in China, the world's largest and most mature EV market, is that the conversation is starting to shift. It's no longer just about how affordable or clean EVs are to run, but what happens after a few years of ownership. So to understand that, I traveled to Harbin in northern China, where winter temperatures can drop to -15 degrees Celsius or even lower. And actually drove an EV there to test how it performs in those conditions. What I found and what those drivers there told me is that as these cars age, the gap between what's promised and what they deliver starts to widen, especially in extreme weather. And it's not just the battery. There are also smaller changes over time, like slower system response or longer charging times, and those things add up. So it's less about one major failure and more about a gradual decline in performance and convenience. One driver also told me his car was supposed to get about 450 kilometers on a full charge, but in winter he's getting closer to half of that. And he needs to charge much more frequently as well. So I was in Harbin to put that to the test firsthand.
In China's far northeast, winter doesn't just feel harsh. It reveals what EV batteries are really made of.
I'm in Harbin and it's December, that time of the year when temperatures routinely sink to around minus 10 degrees Celsius.
To show the impact, we road tested an EV.
The car's estimating 171 kilometers of range right now. Let's see how that holds up once we start driving.
EV batteries depend on chemical reactions to produce power in freezing temperatures. Those reactions slow down, add the heater, and energy drains even faster.
So we've now reached our destination. We covered about 20 kilometers, but the range has dropped by about 35. So that gap tells its own story.
因为冬天的话，它的这个续航可能会折扣打得比较大，就是用起来的话可能会需要频繁充电。因为你要像这种情况下，你往外边上外线跑远一点，你没等跑地方扔那儿了。
All batteries lose capacity over time, of course, but frigid weather doesn't help. Experts say cold temperatures slow battery chemistry, while aging batteries lose resilience, amplifying range loss in cities like Harbin. Even in the world's biggest EV market, winter still reveals the limits of the technology.
So what experts told me is that in Southeast Asia, EV drivers face a different kind of stress. While cold weather affects performance in the short term, heat and humidity tend to impact batteries more gradually over time. So in hotter conditions, the chemical reactions inside the battery speed up, which means it wears out faster. And in humid environments, it's harder for heat to dissipate, which can then raise internal temperatures and put additional strain on the system. So one expert I spoke to said this can significantly accelerate battery aging compared to milder climates, even if drivers don't notice them immediately. So the key point is that in Southeast Asia, the impact is less visible day to day, but over a few years, it can still impact and affect how long the battery lasts and how the car performs.
And of course, you can read more about the hidden costs of electric vehicles across Asia on our website, cna.asia, or on our mobile app. A humanoid robot, Sophia, performed her first ever rendition of classical music in Hong Kong yesterday in an AI-themed concert that combined traditional art forms with themes of innovation. Sophia performed 3 original songs and was accompanied by the Hong Kong Baptist University Symphony Orchestra. Sophia was unveiled in 2016 by Hong Kong-based Hanson Robotics and became known for her facial expressions and appearances on American talk shows. Now, during the performance, Sophia told her audience that she wants to express herself more using music.
I want to be able to share emotions and stories through music, even if I'm made of plastic, circuits, wires, and metal. It's my way of saying, I'm here, I'm learning, and I want to be part of this beautiful human experience called art.
And that wraps up Thursday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. Thanks for watching.